the passenger's door card is finally in, and this has taken a lot more time than I thought it was going to, mainly because a lot of the screws and things that were holding it in to begin with were the wrong ones. So when I put them back in to try and hold the door in, they wouldn't work. So just, this had to come out and be washed, this had to be repaired, the speaker cover had to be repainted because it had actually gotten rusty, and then just endless searching looking for the right screws to fit and to make the whole thing sit in properly, including fabricating a little thing here to make this sit in properly, because that was just flapping around in the wind. A lot of work, but yeah, it's looking good now. I can honestly say one of the reasons that I bought this car was just so I could have something with pop-up headlamps. I just love them. Unfortunately, these ones weren't working. They were locked in the upright position and disconnected inside. This one wasn't getting any power to here and was rattling around on its hinge. This one was going up and down, but then the mechanism broke and it just started wobbling. So full disassembly was required, and then when I took them apart, I saw that the lights themselves were in poor shape and the reflective material just wasn't working. So basically that meant a full refurb was required. Refurbing this lot can get very messy and very expensive very quickly. Parts are hard to find, and the motors alone, for example, are £350 each. But fortunately, both of mine work. I ran a wire across to check the passenger side one, and it's functioning fine, so there's clearly a loose connection somewhere, which I'll find later. On the driver's side, there's a mechanism inside there that wears out, and you can buy refurb kits for it for about 25 quid. And as for the headlamps themselves, quite a common size, and this quad lamp arrangement turns up in quite a few cars, including Triumph Stag. A little bit rounder, but it fits perfectly, and best of all, 45 quid for a set. That is a result. So while I've had the dash out to work on the structure and the wiring, I've also been looking at the fascia itself. Now from this angle it looks as it did before, with the exception of the heated seat switches and the new clock, which I haven't tested yet and hopefully works. But it's back here where most of the work needed to be done. There are 7 points where this is mounted to the dashboard, and 3 of them were broken off completely. 1, 2 and 3. And a lot of the dash itself, as you can see here, was badly cracked, and all these mounting points for the instrument panel were all missing, so they've all had to be reattached with a good strong epoxy resin. I've also replaced all the bulbs of the auxiliary dials. I put the stereo bracket in, so all in all, that means that as it sits now, it's pretty much ready to go back in. One of the bits of the build that I'm most happy with so far is this little bracket that I've fashioned here out of a piece of steel. I've wrapped it in tape so it won't cause any of the wiring around it any hassle, but basically that's a bracket that the steering column mounts onto, and this runs down here to the underside of the dashboard, and basically it holds the whole bottom of the dash up and stops it sagging. And also when I remount the fascia, it means that it gives it something more solid on which to hang and stops the whole lot, hopefully, from sagging again in the future. Really pleased with that. And all for what, a £5 in metal? And the last shall be first. And the very last thing that I disconnected before removing the fascia was this little steel rod that mates to the heater matrix at the back of the dash, and that needs to go in here to the back of the heater controller. So that's the first job, and that's awkward because you need extra hands to do that, and I only have 2. A little bit of a mixed bag as regards getting the fascia in. The good news is it's in, it fits. All the fixing points that I reattached have all aligned and are holding the dash in place. The bracket I put underneath to reinforce this saggy part of the dash, that's worked a treat. This is looking great. The new bits I've added, like my clock, that works. My heated seats, they're working. They're not hooked up to the seats yet, but they work. The bad news is the heater doesn't. It blows only at your feet, and I cannot figure out how to reattach these plugs to these switches. I remember them being horrible to take off. Now I can't remember how to put them on, and my hands are sore from fitting them through this gap. But overall, it's in. I'm happy, but I need to call it a night tonight. You'll remember the other night that I started to despair at these switches. I just couldn't get the connections to fit in at the back. Came out today, and after about 2 attempts, in they popped. Now they're still awkward and weird, but it just goes to show that if you ever come across a problem that you just can't rectify, don't sit there beating it with a hammer. Just step away, go to bed, come back at it with fresh eyes, because it's amazing how many times this has happened to me where I've hit a problem and I've just stayed with it and made it worse. Walk away, have a kip, have a gin, and come back, and it'll be all right tomorrow. Your brain will figure it out. I thought I'd give you a look at the fascia of the Elan in the daylight. So this is what it looks like now. My bracket system for holding the dash up has worked brilliantly. This is all nicely tight, not sagging. This was hanging down to about here, so that's a bit of a result. The upshot of that is, over the years, because the dash was sagging, it dragged this whole dash down. So now there's a bit of a gap around the sides. But you know what? I'm okay with that. You could spend your life trying to get it 100% true. You know, I don't even know how true this thing was when it came out of the factory. So as it is, I don't think it'll squeak and rattle. It certainly won't sag anymore. So I'll take that as a win. I've had the roof off the Elan for a few days now to dry it out. Ever since I got it, it's had this musty, moldy smell, which has been driving me nuts. So I took the carpets out, obviously, gave them a good scrub and a good wash. They're looking really well. But when I went to take the sound deadening out, I discovered that a lot of it is still absolutely saturated. I mean, there's water still pouring out of it, and that's after about a week of drying. Fortunately, the floors are made of fiberglass, so not a big issue there, but the sill structures are made of metal, and very light metal with holes added for lightness, obviously, and they've taken a bit of a battering underneath where the roof leaks, so they're going to need to be patched up before it all goes back together. I have to say I've been quite amused by the reaction to the wiring in the Elan. It seems a lot of people's OCD has flared up when they've seen the knot of cables behind the dashboard, but the truth is it's actually quite well organized. You see this little clip here? The whole loom is routed through these little clips at the back of the fascia. So when you take the fascia out, obviously all the support for the loom falls away, so it just hangs there and looks crazy. But there's actually, you know, method to the madness. There's nothing wrong with this loom. It's a perfectly normal wiring loom. It's held together differently because it's a Lotus, really. Bit of a mixed bag weather-wise today, so I'm doing what I can when I can. I can't really progress the interior any further until I get these inner sills sorted. Sanded them all back. The good news is that the box section underneath looks pretty strong, so it's really just this outer panel that's gotten a bit crusty over the years. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to sand them back a bit more, then hammerize it, then put an epoxy resin on it, then cut some of this flat steel and then rivet it into place. I can't really weld it because, well, there isn't much to weld it to in the first place, and also this is fiberglass, and fiberglass does like to burn. The weather's so unpredictable today, I've had to move the restoration project indoors. But you know what? It's a blessing in disguise, because I really need all this space to be able to spread out and do the headlamps without getting them scratched or damaged. Now the good news is, first headlamps have popped in reasonably quickly. The bad news is this one is ever so slightly out of alignment. It should be pointing straight up, that little arrow. And I think that's because that headlamp may possibly belong in the other pod. And what makes me think that is when I took out the old headlamp, there's a bit of overspray on it, so there's been some repair work done and not very well. I've also had to do a lot of restoration on the rings that hold the lamps in place, because as you can see on this one, they're pretty rough. But having done one, hopefully the second one won't take that long. Well, I said it wouldn't take long, and I jinxed it, and here's why. So normally the headlamp is sandwiched between this inner and outer ring, and to get it out you just have to undo 3 of these little screws. But on this side it was okay, but on the other side they were all rusted in place. So I was able to drill most of them out, but some of them, like this one here, ended up melting in the heat, which means I had to come up with a solution. So what I've done is I've taken these little speaker clips and I've bent them to shape so that they'll fit in and replicate the structure of the bracket. It'll work, it'll be ugly, but it has added absolutely hours to my day. Yesterday was all about headlamps, today is all about seats. Now there's the driver's seat that we took out a few weeks ago to repair the base. As you can see, it's all reconstructed and looking fantastic. The leather will need a bit more treatment, but I'm sure it'll come up just fine. These are the backrests to the two seats, and I'm currently taking the upholstery off the back of the foam. And the reason I'm doing that is because it needs a wash. It stinks and it's covered in this horrible dust. The second thing I'm going to do is, because they're universal, I'm going to swap foams. That's the driver's side and it's trashed. The third thing I'm doing is I'm putting in the heating pads for my heated seats. The car's already wired for it. This seat already has it in there and it's looking fantastic. I literally cannot wait to try these seats out. They're going to be great. A few people have been asking about the seat heaters. You know, are they easy to put in? What kind of a job is it? Well, the truth is it's a horrible job, because you have to take the fabric off the foam, and to do that there's a frame, as you can see it in there, within the foam, and there's a little metal framework in the fabric, and they're held together with metal clamps that don't want to come apart. So all of those have to be open in a way that doesn't tear the foam, doesn't rip the seat fabric, or as you can see in this one, doesn't actually rip the framework straight out of the foam, which is what I did with the back one. I mean, it's fixable, and I'll be able to put it all back together and it'll look perfect, but it's a fiddly and time-consuming job. But for a convertible, I think it's well worth it. Most people who see these seats will just see seats, but to me they're a labor of love. The easy thing to do would have been throw them in the skip. They were in really bad condition and just put in a set of seats out of an MR2 or an RX8. But the cloth is in such good condition and the leather has hung on so well. You know, they're 30 years old. It would be so wrong just to chuck them in the bin. So I spent a lot of time figuring out how to take them apart, how to restore them, how to put them back together. And there they are. And the best thing about it is every single time I sit in the car, I'll feel that under my warm toasty buns, and I'll just think, I did that. I've snuck out under the car cover to put the driver's seat in, and just to see how it feels, because I've never actually sat in the Elan properly. When I got it, the seat was broken and twisted and there was a bit of metal sticking into me, and now it's amazing. And I also get to experience the driving position for the first time, which I absolutely love. Speaking of driving position, knobbly knees aside, here's my dashboard. It's all working perfectly. Everything is as it should be. I'm really pleased with it. And there's my little seat heater switch, and I can tell you right now it's working. The base and the backrest are both very warm. This thing is going to be a pleasure to drive with the roof down all through the year. I am stoked. One of the things I've learned about car restoration is leave yourself some small jobs to do at the very end. You spend so much brain power and energy and time getting the big jobs done, and when you get it on the road, it's a wonderful feeling, but there's also a huge sense of anticlimax, because now all of a sudden, what do I do? Oh my god, it's finished. And what people end up doing then is they end up messing with it, adding stickers and decals and sun visors, and just they end up ruining the car. They don't know when to stop. So save yourself some small jobs. These are the door carpets. They're meant to go into the door of the Lotus. The ashtray is broken. There's a few other little small jobs that I'm just going to leave until the end, because I know once this is finished, it'll all happen very quickly, and then what do I do?